The movie begins with Elizabeth, who is traveling through the mountains with her new husband, Dr. Henry Kellenberg. She had dreamt of finding a remarkable man who would take her into a world of their own, and that man is Henry. Upon reaching his home, she meets his servant, Claire Stratton, and his blind son, Oliver. They have a grand dinner and then retire to their bedroom for their first night as a married couple. The next day, Henry gives her a tour of the house, which has numerous rooms. Each room has a unique lock that can only be opened by scanning a thumbprint, and they are all programmed to recognize both Elizabeth's and Henry's prints. However, there is one room that she is forbidden from entering, and Henry makes her promise not to enter it. This promise is made just before they become intimate in the hallway, an act that Claire witnesses. Henry informs her that he will have to leave early the next morning for work. The following day, Claire approaches Elizabeth to ask about lunch, giving Elizabeth the opportunity to inquire about Henry. She has seen his Nobel Prize and wonders why such an accomplished man would marry a simple woman like her. Claire responds that she doesn't know and then leaves. That night, Elizabeth notices Claire and Oliver leaving the house. Despite her best efforts, she can't sleep, so she decides to investigate the forbidden room. Inside, she discovers a lab with strange machines. She opens one of these machines and is horrified to find a sleeping body that looks exactly like hers. Panicked, she runs out of the room, accidentally cutting her finger on a tray in the process. After bandaging the cut, she tries to make a phone call, but the line is dead. Eventually, she falls asleep and doesn't wake up until noon. The next day, Elizabeth feels uncomfortable around Henry. They discuss their days, and she mentions the phone issue. Henry explains that it's common for phones not to work in that area. He then asks about her finger, and she tells him it was just an accident. In the middle of the night, Henry gets out of bed, and Elizabeth follows him. She barely reaches the stairs when Henry finds her and tells her she will be punished for disobeying him. He then reveals a machete and starts chasing her around the house. Elizabeth tries to escape, but the locks no longer recognize her thumbprint. She hides in the wine cellar, which Henry enters but then leaves when he doesn't find her, deciding to wait in the living room. When Elizabeth finally emerges, she finds the living room empty. She grabs a fire poker and tries to go upstairs, but Henry is hiding behind them. Henry trips her up by grabbing her ankle, intending to kill her with a machete. The next day, Claire and Oliver assist him in burying the body in the forest, and they all have breakfast together as if nothing happened. Claire urges Henry to stop his actions before he gets caught, but he doesn't listen. In the afternoon, his friend Frank Logan, a detective, visits him. After assuring Frank that Elizabeth is asleep, Henry asks about Frank's concerns. Frank admits that he's worried because his department is under investigation for accepting bribes. Frank has been spared, but he'll have to testify against some of his friends who weren't as lucky. Henry's cold response is that it's better to be the one inflicting pain than the one suffering it. Meanwhile, Claire is interrupted from writing in her journal by Oliver, who has brought her flowers. Claire rejects them and asks him to stop giving her presents, but Oliver questions why she stays if she's so unhappy. She claims it's because she knows things, but Oliver believes she stays because she loves Henry. After dismissing him, Claire takes her medication. 6 weeks later, during a car ride through the mountains, Elizabeth wakes up from a dream where she meets a brilliant man who takes her into a world of her own. Her wedding dress is different, but the routine is the same. Henry introduces her to his family, shows her around the house while Claire watches from a distance, makes her promise not to enter a certain room, and after dinner and dancing, they spend their first night together as a married couple. Before they fall asleep, Henry tells her he'll have to leave soon for work. Unable to sleep, Elizabeth goes to the kitchen and finds Claire smoking. She expresses a desire to know more about Claire, but they're interrupted by Henry, who takes her back to bed. The next morning, Elizabeth finds herself alone in the house. After some time, she gives in to curiosity and enters the forbidden room. She discovers a duplicate of herself in a machine and runs away. This time, the capsule opens, and the duplicate Elizabeth comes out and chases her. The duplicate finds Elizabeth sleeping, and after confirming that Claire and Oliver are not around, she touches Elizabeth's face and lifts her pajama top. The next day, Elizabeth wakes up late and finds her clothes disheveled. Henry finds her and asks if she's okay, so she goes to the bathroom to freshen up. Henry tries to follow her, but despite Elizabeth's efforts to keep the door closed, Henry manages to get in and grab a towel. When he accuses her of disobedience, Elizabeth tries to escape, but Henry makes her trip and starts to strangle her with the towel. After a struggle, she manages to kick him off and tries to run again, only to find that the exit door won't unlock with her thumbprint. With the windows also being unbreakable, Elizabeth rushes to the kitchen to grab some knives, while Henry prepares an anesthetic cloth. Next, Henry goes to the living room to play the piano, then he leaves a recording playing to trick Elizabeth into thinking he's still there. The plan works. She leaves her hiding spot in the kitchen, and Henry appears behind her, pressing the cloth against her nose and mouth. Elizabeth fights back until she falls asleep, but it's all a trick to lower his guard. She soon wakes up and stabs Henry, effectively killing him. They both fall to the floor, and as Henry bleeds out, the anesthetic takes effect, and Elizabeth falls asleep. When Elizabeth wakes up hours later, she drags Henry's body to the door and tries to use his fingers to unlock it, but it doesn't work. She then cleans the floor, covers Henry's body with his jacket, takes a shower, removes her wedding ring, and burns her blood-stained pajamas. Later, she's startled awake from a nap on the couch by Henry's mobile ringing, showing many missed calls from Claire. Elizabeth calls 911 and tells them she's locked in her house, but she doesn't know the address. Unfortunately, before she can provide more information, Claire and Oliver return, so Elizabeth hangs up and pretends to have been reading. Claire and Oliver are shocked to find her there and even more surprised when she says Henry is upstairs sleeping. This makes Claire so nervous that she has a heart attack before she can even reach the kitchen. She manages to call 911 before passing out, and an ambulance arrives soon after to take her away. Elizabeth wants to leave as well, but Oliver stops her, telling her that if she leaves, he can't protect her from the police. He knows Henry is dead and believes Claire when she says she killed him in self-defense. He even recites the secret world phrase she dreamed about before asking her to show him where the body is. Together, they take the body to the incinerator. Oliver then asks Elizabeth about her past. She tells him that she was often sick in the hospital as a child, her parents died in a car crash, and she was raised in an orphanage. Oliver tells her that those memories happened in the other house nearby, where he and Claire sleep, and she was there until she was 8. While Claire would be better at explaining this since she was part of the experiment, Oliver still tries, telling her she's been cooked in the forbidden room like an egg. 6 identical genetic copies were made, and she is the 5th of the Elizabeth harvest. At that moment, they see Frank's car approaching, so Oliver quickly gives her some information to handle it. She greets Frank in the living room, telling him Henry is napping because he isn't feeling well. While Oliver goes to fetch them some water, Frank asks her if she's okay because he's heard about the 911 call. Oliver returns and tells him it was Claire who called when she had the heart attack, a lie that Elizabeth goes along with. As Oliver leaves the room to grab something else, Frank comments on how strange it is that everyone in the house has a problem. Elizabeth with her sleep disorder, Claire with her weak heart, Oliver is blind, and now Henry isn't feeling well either. However, he suddenly falls dead when Oliver returns with a rifle and shoots him. Oliver explains to Elizabeth that Henry has been paying Frank off since he brought another Elizabeth clone home 3 years ago. Henry killed Elizabeth too, like he did with every clone up until now. After Elizabeth turned 8, she was put back in the tank, which is why she has a gap in her memory. She would only be brought out for physical therapy and to fill her mind with memories and events, as well as to customize her personality. Elizabeth doesn't want to hear any more about the experiment, so once again, she helps Oliver take the body to the incinerator. Afterward, Oliver tells her to get a bag with clothes and some money from the safe ready so Elizabeth can escape. However, before she can leave, he asks her to read Claire's journal because he can't and needs some important information from there. He then locks Elizabeth up until she finishes reading. With nothing else to do, she starts reading a journal. It tells the story of Henry, a billionaire who made his fortune from cell research. He invited Claire, a neurodegenerative expert, to his home 5 years ago. He showed her the clones he made of his wife, Elizabeth, who died from a rare disease during childbirth. Henry cloned Elizabeth 6 times, but the first 2 clones died at birth. The remaining 4 were put into cryogenic sleep until a cure could be found. Claire was tasked with finding this cure. After 2 years, she succeeded, and they started implanting memories into the clones. The 3rd clone woke up healthy, but disoriented and with memory issues. She discovered the cloning room and escaped, only to be found by Frank. They pretended she was Claire's mentally ill niece. Frank was paid off by Henry to keep the secret. During this time, Oliver brought her food and apologized for locking her up. She attacked him, tied him up, and tried to escape, but failed. She found Oliver in the cloning room, working on the final clone. He promised to let her go after she finished reading the journal. She woke up chained in her room after being sedated. She continued reading the journal, learning about the death of the third clone and the ongoing research. Claire and Henry became romantically involved as they grew desperate. In the present, Oliver brings her more food and they exchange information. She learns that Henry sabotaged the samples, not Claire. Oliver also reveals that all the clones lived in the house while he was away at boarding school. He met the second clone when he returned, and he thought she was beautiful. Henry, out of jealousy, blinds Oliver. Oliver leaves after expressing his dislike for Henry and Elizabeth's relationship. Elizabeth continues reading the journal. Claire ends her relationship with Henry, realizing she can't replace Elizabeth. Henry confesses his desire to relive his wedding night repeatedly. Despite her initial reluctance, Claire helps bring the fourth Elizabeth clone to life. Claire suspects Oliver is a clone of Henry's, but Henry dismisses this, expressing his fear that Elizabeth would prefer a younger version of him. Disturbed by this, Elizabeth takes a break from the journal. 2 days later, Oliver wakes her up threateningly, refusing to explain his absence. Elizabeth tells him that Claire thought he was a clone, but Henry proved otherwise. Confused, Oliver steps away. Elizabeth convinces him to come closer, promising they can be together. She then pushes him away, takes his scissors and chain key, and demands the door code. Their confrontation is interrupted by the sixth Elizabeth clone, dressed in a wedding dress and armed with a rifle. She believes Oliver over Elizabeth V, who tries to convince her otherwise. In the ensuing chaos, Oliver is killed and Elizabeth V is injured. She manages to escape the room and open the door, only to be shot again by Elizabeth VI. Before dying, Elizabeth V urges Elizabeth VI to read Claire's diary. After freshening up and changing clothes, Elizabeth VI begins reading the journal over breakfast. She learns about the night Henry killed Elizabeth IV, and how Claire threatened to call the police. Henry convinces her not to, arguing that no one would believe her since Elizabeth was already considered dead. In the present, Claire returns from the hospital and encounters Elizabeth at the door, ready to leave. Elizabeth hands Claire the journal, telling her to use the house and money wisely. She then leaves, finally free from the imposed memories. And with that, the movie ends. We hope you enjoyed our recap. Like the video and subscribe to our channel for more amazing recaps. See you in the next one.